On a frozen morning in January 1945, near the French village of Holtzweiler, 19-year-old Lieutenant Audie Murphy stood alone on a burning tank destroyer, surrounded by 6 German tanks and hundreds of enemy infantry closing in from 3 sides. His company had been shattered, his men were dead or wounded, and only his M1 Garand rifle and the destroyer's .50 caliber machine gun stood between the Germans and complete breakthrough. What happened in the next hour would earn Murphy the Medal of Honor and create the legend of the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II.
The boy who became a warrior. Audie Leon Murphy was born on June 20, 1925, in a sharecropper's shack near Kingston, Texas, one of 12 children in a family so poor that hunger was a constant companion. His father abandoned the family when Audie was young, leaving his mother to struggle alone to feed and clothe the children through the Depression's worst years. When Audie was 16, his mother died, leaving him as the primary provider for his younger siblings. Murphy stood barely 5 foot 5 inches tall and weighed perhaps 110 pounds soaking wet. He looked younger than his years, with a baby face that would never quite mature even after years of combat. But poverty and responsibility had given him a toughness that wasn't visible in his slight frame. He had hunted since childhood, squirrels, rabbits, whatever could be shot and eaten, developing the marksmanship skills and patience that would later save his life and the lives of countless comrades. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Murphy was 16 years old and working odd jobs to support his siblings. He wanted to enlist immediately, but was rejected by the Marines for being underweight and too short, rejected by the paratroopers for the same reasons, and nearly rejected by the Army until a recruiter took pity on him and overlooked his obvious deficiencies. Murphy finally enlisted in June 1942, weeks after his 17th birthday, lying about his age and his mother's permission. "I didn't join to be a hero," Murphy later said. "I joined because it was the only way I could see to feed my family. The Army paid $50 a month, and most of that could be sent home. That was more money than I'd ever seen." Basic training revealed that Murphy's slight build concealed surprising physical resilience and exceptional hand-eye coordination. More importantly, his years of hunting had made him a natural marksman. Where other recruits struggled to hit targets at 100 yards, Murphy could hit consistently at 300 yards or more. His instructors noticed, and Murphy was marked as someone with potential despite his unprepossessing appearance. The weapon Murphy trained with was the M1 Garand rifle, the same weapon that would be in his hands during his most famous action. Designed by John Garand and adopted by the U.S. Army in 1936, the M1 was the first semi-automatic rifle to become standard issue for any military in the world. It fired the powerful .30-06 cartridge, held 8 rounds in an en-bloc clip that fed from the top of the action, and could be fired as fast as a trained soldier could pull the trigger. The M1 was everything in combat, Murphy wrote in his autobiography, To Hell and Back. It was reliable, accurate, and gave you firepower that saved your life over and over. I practiced with it constantly, broke it down and reassembled it until I could do it blindfolded, learned every nuance of how it shot. That rifle became part of me. Murphy shipped out to North Africa in early 1943 as a replacement in Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. The 3rd Division had already been in combat, fighting in North Africa and preparing for the invasion of Sicily. Murphy arrived as a private, an anonymous replacement that veteran soldiers barely noticed. His youthful appearance and small size made him look like he wouldn't last a week in combat.
Baptism by fire. Murphy's first combat came during the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. The landing was chaotic, with troops scattered across beaches while German defenders poured artillery and machine gun fire into the landing zones. Murphy waded ashore carrying his M1 Garand, 80 rounds of ammunition, and equipment that weighed nearly as much as he did. Around him, men were being hit, screaming, dying in the surf or on the beach. I was terrified, Murphy admitted later. I'd never seen men die before, never heard the sound of bullets passing close, never felt the concussion of artillery exploding nearby. Every instinct told me to dig a hole and hide, but I saw the older soldiers moving forward, and I moved with them because I was more afraid of appearing cowardly than of being killed. That first action set the pattern for Murphy's combat career. Despite his fear, which never entirely left him through years of combat, Murphy continued to function, to fight, to do what needed to be done. As days became weeks and weeks became months, Murphy proved himself in the countless small actions that characterize infantry combat: ambushes, firefights, night patrols, clearing buildings and bunkers, advancing under fire. His marksmanship became legendary within the company. While most soldiers fired their M1 Garands rapidly, spraying bullets in the general direction of the enemy, Murphy aimed each shot, making every round count. Officers noticed that when Murphy fired, Germans went down. He was promoted to corporal, then sergeant as the campaign ground through Sicily and then on to the Italian mainland. The Italian campaign was brutal, a series of river crossings, mountain assaults, and fortified positions that had to be taken one by one. The Germans defended every ridge and every village, extracting a heavy toll for every mile the Allies advanced. Murphy's company was repeatedly chewed up and rebuilt with replacements who often didn't survive long enough for Murphy to learn their names. "I stopped making friends," Murphy said at this period. "Men you ate breakfast with were dead by dinner. You learned to keep distance, to not care too much, because caring hurt when they died. The old soldiers, the ones who'd been there since North Africa, we recognized each other. We didn't need to talk much. We knew." Murphy was wounded for the first time in September 1943, taking shrapnel in his hip during an artillery barrage. He refused evacuation, had the wounds patched at an aid station, and returned to his unit the same day. Officers noticed, and Murphy was promoted to staff sergeant, leading a squad of men, most of whom were older and larger than he was, but who recognized that the baby-faced Texan knew how to stay alive and keep his men alive. By early 1944, Murphy had been in continuous combat for nearly a year. He'd been wounded twice, had seen his company commander killed, had lost count of how many Germans he'd killed or how many times he'd nearly been killed himself. The constant stress, the accumulated trauma, the deaths of friends, it all took a toll that wasn't visible but was eating away at him internally. But there was no relief, no rotation home for soldiers who'd been in combat too long. The Army needed experienced infantry, and Murphy was too valuable to pull from the line. When the 3rd Division was withdrawn from Italy to prepare for the invasion of southern France, Murphy went with them, carrying his scarred M1 Garand and the accumulated weight of a year of combat.
The liberation of France. Operation Dragoon began on August 15, 1944. By this time, Murphy had been promoted to second lieutenant through battlefield commission, recognition of his leadership and tactical skills despite his youth and lack of formal education. He commanded a platoon of Company B, leading men into combat against German forces that were increasingly desperate as the Third Reich crumbled. The campaign through southern France was faster paced than Italy, with the Germans conducting fighting withdrawals rather than defending every position to the death. But it was still dangerous, still deadly, and still grinding down the men who had to do the fighting. Murphy's platoon participated in dozens of engagements, clearing villages, ambushing German convoys, and maintaining contact with an enemy that was retreating but still dangerous. Murphy's growing reputation extended beyond his company.
Stories circulated about the baby-faced lieutenant who seemed impossible to kill, who could shoot like a sniper with his M1 Garand, and who led from the front despite being barely old enough to vote. Correspondents heard the stories and sought Murphy out, creating publicity that embarrassed him, but fed the Army's need for heroes to boost morale at home. On October 2, 1944, near the French village of Lamette, Murphy single-handedly destroyed a German machine gun nest that had pinned down his platoon. He crawled forward under fire, got within grenade range, and killed or captured the entire crew. The action earned him his first Silver Star and reinforced his reputation for courage under fire. 2 weeks later, Murphy was wounded again when a mortar fragment tore through his hip. This time the wound was serious enough that he should have been evacuated, but Murphy refused, knowing that his platoon was under strength and that losing him would burden the surviving NCOs with leadership responsibilities they weren't ready for. He had field medics patch the wound and continued commanding his platoon despite pain and limited mobility. "I couldn't leave," Murphy explained later. "These were my men, my responsibility. What kind of officer abandons his men because of a wound that isn't immediately fatal? I'd sent too many men into situations where they died following my orders. The least I could do was share their risks." By January 1945, Murphy's 3rd Division was advancing into the Colmar Pocket, a German salient west of the Rhine River that Allied forces were working to eliminate. The fighting was bitter, with German forces defending desperately in freezing winter conditions. Snow covered the ground, temperatures were well below freezing, and both sides were exhausted from months of continuous operations. On January 26, 1945, Company B was ordered to advance along a road near the village of Holzwehr, a small farming community that German forces were using as a strong point. Murphy's platoon was at the forefront, advancing cautiously through frozen fields, while German artillery periodically shelled the road and surrounding area.
The hour that defined a legend. The morning of January 26, 1945, dawned cold and clear. Murphy's Company B, numbering perhaps 40 men after recent casualties, was tasked with advancing toward Holzwehr and clearing German positions. Intelligence suggested limited German presence, a reinforced company at most. The reality was far worse. As Murphy's lead elements advanced into open ground near the Holzwehr woods, German forces opened fire from concealed positions. What intelligence had assessed as a company was actually a much larger force, perhaps 250 German infantry, supported by 6 tanks, including several Panzer IVs. The Americans had walked into a trap. The initial German fire was devastating. Men went down across the open ground, caught in a kill zone with no cover. Murphy's first thought was to get his men off the road and into what limited cover existed: ditches, shell craters, anything. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun mounted on an M10 tank destroyer behind Murphy's position opened fire, suppressing some German positions, but the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Within minutes, German fire had killed or wounded more than half of Murphy's company. The survivors were scattered, pinned down in inadequate cover, unable to advance or retreat without being cut down. The M10 tank destroyer, hit by German fire, erupted in flames. The crew bailed out and fled, leaving the burning vehicle 50 yards in front of Murphy's position. Murphy realized immediately that if the Germans broke through, the entire American line would collapse. Behind Company B were support units, supply elements, and command posts, all vulnerable to armored attack. Company B was all that stood between the German forces and a breakthrough that could threaten the entire division's position. "Fall back to the woods," Murphy ordered his surviving men, recognizing they couldn't hold in the open ground. The men began withdrawing, carrying wounded when possible, leaving the dead where they fell. Murphy remained forward, using his M1 Garand to cover the withdrawal, firing carefully aimed shots at German soldiers who tried to rush the American positions. Then Murphy saw the burning M10 tank destroyer and the .50 caliber machine gun mounted on its turret, still operational despite the vehicle being on fire. In a decision that defied rational calculation, Murphy ran forward to the burning vehicle, climbed onto it despite flames and the very real possibility it would explode at any moment, and manned the .50 caliber machine gun. "I didn't think about it," Murphy said later. "The Germans were coming, my men were falling back, and that machine gun was the only way to stop them. The vehicle was burning, but the gun worked, and that was all that mattered." For the next hour, Murphy stood on the burning tank destroyer, exposed to German fire from multiple directions, operating the .50 caliber machine gun with devastating effect. The heavy machine gun, far more powerful than his M1 Garand, could reach out 1,000 yards and punch through cover that would stop rifle fire. Murphy used it like a precision instrument, targeting German infantry attempting to advance, destroying crew-served weapons, and generally creating such a storm of fire that the German advance stalled. German return fire was intense. Bullets snapped past Murphy's head, struck the tank destroyer around him, and occasionally hit the ammunition stowage he was standing on. The vehicle's fuel and ammunition could explode at any moment, which would have killed Murphy instantly. But he continued firing, calling artillery strikes on his own position through a field telephone, directing fire onto concentrations of German soldiers while somehow avoiding being hit himself. The Germans focused their fire on Murphy, recognizing that the lone American on the burning vehicle was stopping their entire attack. They fired rifles, machine guns, and even tank main guns at him. The tank destroyer was repeatedly hit, but Murphy remained untouched, as if protected by some invisible shield. He went through several boxes of .50 caliber ammunition, hundreds of rounds, killing an estimated 50 German soldiers and wounding many more. Finally, after nearly an hour of continuous fire, the Germans withdrew. They'd suffered too many casualties, and their attack had stalled against the one-man defense Murphy provided. As the Germans pulled back, Murphy climbed down from the tank destroyer, which exploded in a massive fireball minutes later, and walked back to his company's position as if he'd just completed a routine task. "How are the men?" was Murphy's first question when he reached the company's position. Not concern for himself, not recognition of what he'd just accomplished, but worry for his soldiers. The medics checked Murphy over and found he'd been wounded, a piece of shrapnel in his leg that he either had not noticed during the action or had ignored. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was enough to require evacuation. Murphy was finally pulled off the line, having survived one of the most remarkable individual combat actions in military history.
The weight of medals. Murphy's action at Outnumbered earned him the Medal of Honor, America's highest decoration for valor. The citation described how he'd stood alone against overwhelming enemy forces, destroyed 2 German machine gun crews, killed or wounded 50 enemy soldiers, and prevented a breakthrough that could have had strategic consequences. Combined with his previous decorations, Murphy became the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. 33 decorations and medals, including every U.S. Army Valor decoration, 5 from France, and 1 from Belgium. But the medals couldn't erase what the war had done to Murphy. He returned to the United States in June 1945, hailed as a hero, celebrated in parades and press conferences, and offered opportunities that a poor Texas farm boy could never have imagined. Hollywood beckoned, and Murphy eventually became a movie star, playing himself in To Hell and Back, the film adaptation of his autobiography. Yet Murphy carried invisible wounds that no medal could heal. He suffered from what we now call PTSD,
nightmares, insomnia, depression, and an inability to readjust to civilian life. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, started at loud noises, and struggled with the transition from a world where violent action was rewarded to one where it was criminal. "The war never left me," Murphy admitted in later years. "I could be in a room full of people and suddenly I'd be back in Italy or France, seeing men die, feeling the terror. The medals meant I'd survived, but they couldn't give back what the war had taken. The friends who died, the innocence I lost, the part of me that died in foxholes across Europe." Murphy used his celebrity to advocate for veterans' mental health care, speaking publicly about his struggles with PTSD at a time when such admissions were seen as weakness. He testified before Congress about the inadequate care veterans received, drawing on his own experiences and those of fellow veterans who struggled in silence. He also remained connected to the M1 Garand rifle that had been his constant companion through the war. In interviews and public appearances, Murphy frequently mentioned the rifle, praising its reliability and accuracy. He kept an M1 Garand in his home, occasionally taking it to shooting ranges where his marksmanship remained exceptional decades after the war ended. "That rifle saved my life more times than I can count," Murphy said. "It never jammed on me, never failed when I needed it. Every American soldier who carried an M1 Garand owed their life to John Garand's genius. It was the greatest combat rifle of the war, and I was privileged to carry one."
The legend and the man. Murphy's fame grew over the decades following the war. His autobiography, To Hell and Back, became a bestseller. The film adaptation was enormously successful, and his wartime exploits were taught in military schools as examples of courage and leadership. The baby-faced soldier who stood alone on a burning tank destroyer became an icon of American military valor. But the real Audie Murphy was more complex than the legend. He was a man who did extraordinary things in combat, but struggled to function in peace. He had business failures, including bad investments and unsuccessful ventures. He struggled with alcohol and prescription drug dependency as he self-medicated his PTSD. His marriages were troubled, his personal relationships strained by his inability to escape the war's shadow. "People see the medals and think I'm some kind of hero," Murphy told a friend late in life. "But I was just a soldier doing his job, trying to stay alive and keep my men alive. The real heroes are the ones who didn't come home, whose names nobody remembers. I survived through luck as much as skill, and I carry the guilt of surviving when better men died." On May 28, 1971, Audie Murphy died in a plane crash near Roanoke, Virginia. He was 45 years old, too young, but perhaps merciful for a man who had never truly escaped the war that defined his life. His funeral at Arlington National Cemetery drew thousands, including veterans who wanted to pay respects to a soldier who had represented the best of American fighting men. Murphy was buried with full military honors in Section 46 of Arlington National Cemetery. His grave, marked by a simple white headstone, became one of the most visited in the cemetery, second only to President John F. Kennedy's. Visitors leave flowers, medals, and notes thanking him for his service and sacrifice.
The M1 Garand's role in Murphy's story. While Murphy's courage and skill were personal attributes, his effectiveness in combat was significantly enhanced by the M1 Garand rifle. The weapon's semi-automatic capability meant Murphy could fire 8 aimed shots without manually cycling a bolt action, a crucial advantage in the rapid exchanges of infantry combat. The .30-06 cartridge provided excellent range and stopping power, allowing Murphy to engage targets at distances where enemy soldiers with bolt-action rifles struggled to return effective fire. The rifle's reliability was legendary. Unlike some contemporary weapons that jammed frequently under field conditions, the M1 Garand functioned reliably in mud, rain, snow, and extreme temperatures. Murphy's rifle, used continuously through nearly 3 years of combat, never experienced a critical malfunction during action. This reliability was literally life-saving for soldiers who depended on their weapons functioning when seconds meant the difference between survival and death. The M1 Garand's accuracy allowed skilled marksmen like Murphy to engage targets precisely, rather than relying on volume of fire. Murphy's hunting background and natural marksmanship combined with the M1's inherent accuracy to create a deadly combination. Where other soldiers might fire an entire 8-round clip to hit one target, Murphy could engage and hit multiple targets with the same 8 rounds. The M1 made every American infantry soldier the equal of any enemy, Murphy observed. A private with an M1 had more firepower than most enemy squad leaders. It gave us an advantage that saved countless lives. General Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. And he was right. The contrast between the M1 Garand and German weapons was significant. Most German infantry carried bolt-action Kar 98K rifles, reliable weapons but requiring manual cycling between each shot. The few Germans equipped with semi-automatic rifles like the Gewehr 43 had weapons that were less reliable and more difficult to maintain than the M1. This firepower disparity meant that American soldiers could put more rounds downrange faster, a critical advantage in infantry combat. During Murphy's stand at Holtzwihr, he used both his M1 Garand and the .50 caliber machine gun. The machine gun provided the sustained fire that stopped the German advance, but Murphy had his M1 slung across his back throughout the action and used it before and after manning the .50 caliber. The rifle was his primary weapon, his constant companion, the tool he trusted most in combat.
The broader context of Murphy's service, while remarkable, were representative of a larger phenomenon, the effectiveness of American infantry during World War II. American soldiers were generally better equipped, better supplied, and better supported than their enemies. The M1 Garand was symbolic of this advantage. While other nations equipped their soldiers with weapons designed in the 1890s or early 1900s, America provided a modern semi-automatic rifle as standard issue. This technological edge, combined with America's industrial capacity and logistical capabilities, meant that American infantry could often prevail even when outnumbered or in tactically disadvantageous positions. Murphy's stand at Holtzwihr succeeded partly because of his courage and skill, but also because he had superior weapons, could call on artillery support through working communications, and knew that if he could hold long enough, reinforcements and supplies would arrive. The broader strategic context of Murphy's service also matters. He fought in campaigns, Sicily, Italy, France, where Allied numerical and material superiority was overwhelming. Germany was fighting on multiple fronts, with resources stretched impossibly thin, facing enemies with vast industrial superiority. Murphy was an exceptional soldier, but he fought for a side that was winning and had the resources to support soldiers effectively. This doesn't diminish Murphy's courage or achievements, but it provides context. His actions were extraordinary regardless of the strategic situation. Standing on a burning vehicle for an hour while hundreds of enemy soldiers tried to kill him required courage that transcended equipment or support. But understanding the broader context helps explain how American soldiers like Murphy could achieve what they did. They were skilled and brave, but they also had advantages that enemy soldiers lacked.
The enduring legacy.
Audie Murphy's story has endured for more than 75 years because it represents something fundamental about American military tradition. The citizen soldier who rises to extraordinary challenges, fights with skill and courage, and then returns to civilian life rather than seeking power or glory. Murphy didn't ask for fame, didn't seek position, and never tried to leverage his military achievements for political gain. His honesty about PTSD and his advocacy for veterans' mental health care created a legacy beyond his combat achievements. At a time when mental health issues were stigmatized and veterans were expected to suffer in silence, Murphy spoke openly about his struggles, helping to legitimize discussions about combat trauma and the need for better care. The weapons and equipment Murphy used, particularly the M1 Garand rifle, have also achieved iconic status. The M1 Garand rifle served with U.S. forces from 1936 through the early 1960s, seeing combat in World War II, Korea, and the early stages of Vietnam. It armed the American soldiers who defeated Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, who held the line in Korea, and who represented American power during the Cold War's early decades. The rifle became symbolic of America's military might and technological superiority. Today, M1 Garand rifles are prized collector's items, with veterans organizations and the Civilian Marksmanship Program ensuring that these historic weapons remain available for civilian ownership and use. Shooting enthusiasts appreciate the rifle's craftsmanship, reliability, and place in history. Veterans and military historians recognize it as one of the most significant small arms designs of the 20th century. Murphy's story, intertwined with that of the M1 Garand, represents a moment when individual courage, superior equipment, and just cause combined to achieve remarkable results. He was an ordinary young man, thrust into extraordinary circumstances, who discovered reserves of courage and capability he didn't know he possessed. The rifle he carried was a tool, but in skilled hands it became an extension of the soldier's will, enabling achievements that might not have been possible with lesser weapons. Murphy's graves of comrades, those who died in Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany, are scattered across Europe in military cemeteries that mark the path of America's advance from 1943 to 1945. Murphy survived to tell their story, to represent the millions of American soldiers who fought and the hundreds of thousands who died defeating fascism. His medals and fame were never just about his individual achievements, but about representing all those who served and sacrificed. 75 years after Murphy stood on that burning tank destroyer near Holtzweiler, his story continues to inspire. Military academies teach his actions as examples of courage under fire and leadership in crisis. Veterans recognize in his story their own experiences of combat, the fear, the loss, the bonds formed under fire. And Americans generally see in Murphy's life a reminder that extraordinary courage and capability can emerge from the most ordinary backgrounds, that heroes don't look like what we expect, and that the greatest achievements often come from those who never sought glory, but simply did their duty in the face of impossible odds. The M1 Garand rifle that Murphy carried through the war survives in museums, private collections, and in the hands of shooting enthusiasts who appreciate its historical significance and mechanical excellence. Each rifle carries echoes of the men who used them in combat, who depended on them for survival, and who accomplished remarkable things with these tools of war. Murphy's story and the M1 Garand's legacy are forever intertwined, each enhancing the other, the man who exemplified American courage and the weapon that armed American soldiers through the nation's greatest military triumph.